haunted Michigan. Terrifying tales.
Doug, how are you? Good to see you, my friend.
Hey, thanks for the time, Meltdown. Really appreciate it.
Now, for those that don't know, you have a new movie coming out called Thorns. We'll get into that here in just a bit. But First of all, give us your background in the movie industry, the horror industry, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I'm a Michigan guy, born and raised in Detroit. Ended up going to school out in Waterford, and I found my way to Eastern Michigan University and, got into independent filmmaking, of all things. And, like guys like Sam Raimi and The Evil Dead. Very early on, I learned about how movies could be made outside the studio system. And so there's a lot of commercial film work that goes on in the Detroit area. So I decided to stay here and I started a production company, and I've made about 6 or 7 independent films. I'm more of a weekend warrior, if you will. That's how all that sort of the genesis of that, if you will. Yeah.
And so now when you're not making movies, you run the Motion Picture Institute. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. We're, the best way to describe us is we're sort of the Specs Howard of film, because a lot of people know Specs, right?
Right.
Or knew of Specs. And we're actually fully accredited. It's a 1-year program. And, we teach sort of the on-set protocol of film, the film and digital media world. And, you could go into an IMAX movie theater or turn on Netflix or if you've heard of a show called The Ghost Adventures with Zach Baggins, he's our grad. So we've actually got a lot of prolific graduates that work in the film industry behind the scenes that actually went to school in Troy, through our film school. So that's pretty exciting.
Now, you mentioned the other local guy there, Sam Raimi. Do you know him?
Yeah. We know those guys. Sam works with Rob Tappert and Bruce Campbell. I honestly have never met Sam, but they're a bit of a role model, if you will, because they did the template with Evil Dead, right? And it became sort of a goal for a lot of other independent filmmakers to shoot for, doing lower budgeted horror movies and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. By the way, that Evil Dead movie last year was really good, I thought.
Yeah, for sure. That's that kind of reboot, Evil Dead Rise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear they're doing, more, and I think they're going to be doing, a new Evil Dead every couple of years, right?
Sometimes it can get a little bit oversaturated.
Yeah, no pun intended, right? With the whole gore thing, but
Yeah.
which speaks a bit to our film, which falls into kind of the special effects driven gore zone a bit, but there's a bit more behind it than that.
All right, well, you brought it up, so let's talk about Thorns here. So how
Yeah.
long has this movie been in the process?
Yeah, for sure. When we do an independent film, you're talking usually a year or two actually write the thing, rewrite it, and get it right. And in Michigan, you kind of write to budget. It's not like doing a Marvel movie where you write it and somebody's going to hand you a couple $100 million, right? We actually have to kind of go, how much did we make on the last movie? Oh, okay, we've got a couple $100,000, so we're going to make a movie for a couple $100,000. I really, my love for 80s horror films, John Carpenter, The Thing, and Hellraiser. Those are kind of, the monster movies that I loved growing up, and I wanted to make a very visceral monster movie, but more of a thinking man's visceral horror movie. And there's a movie that came out a couple, or a year ago called Terrifier, right? Everybody's hearing about the Terrifier movie.
Yeah, I loved those movies. Yeah.
Yeah, so well, if you like that, Terrifier 2, we're calling Thorns sort of the thinking man's Terrifier 2.
It's funny you
yeah.
mentioned that because I always tell people about Terrifier. I go 2 words: dumb and fun. That's what the 2 words are.
Well, hopefully we're not dumb, but fun is is what it's all about. And I think there's a trend to go back to, what we call physical practical makeup effects, because so many movies have just become, like 2 hour animated movies with all this CGI. And so this was a very intentional way of making an homage to the 80s classic monster movies, if you will.
Yeah, and of course, you mentioned Hellraiser, and your movie stars none other than Pinhead, Doug
Yeah.
Bradley, who I've met before a couple times. Nice guy.
Yeah.
Seemed to be very soft spoken. I never really, hung out with him at any. But I mean, but you just mentioned that. You just mentioned Hellraiser, so it's pretty cool that you can get somebody like Doug in your movie.
Sure. Yeah. I know his agent. When we make these smaller films, we always try to put a recognizable genre actor in it. And I've worked with, this will date me, but, actors by the name of John Saxon and David Carradine, who unfortunately is no longer with us. And Doug just has quite a following with Hellraiser. His manager actually recommended him. And so I sent him the script and he loved it and we brought him in.
Yeah, I saw an interview where he said he gets bored by scripts and they have to be grammatically correct or something. He said, and that it was, which he would never read it. He would never last past a paragraph of my script, I suppose. But this movie, so I now as opposed to some of the other people you've talked to in interviews and different things, I haven't seen the movie. So I saw the trailer that you sent me. I watched that a few times because I thought that was interesting. So this is like biblical slash sci-fi. So explain the movie a little bit without giving away too much, obviously.
Yeah, sure. Well, we follow an ex-priest who's taken a job with NASA, and it's sort of all metaphorical, right? He couldn't find his answers internally, so now he's looking to the cosmos. And so, he's sent to investigate a remote mountaintop space observatory that's gone offline mysteriously after it receives a signal from deep space. So he goes there and, no pun intended, all hell breaks loose. And then it just becomes sort of a fun ghost house type film, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and so then you're going to debut this coming up here in Michigan?
Yeah, for sure. We've teamed up with the Emagine Theaters, B&B, and some other nationally recognized theaters. The film will be getting a national release, and we're going to start to roll it out in theaters only. So you can't find it online anywhere yet. And we're going to have a red carpet premiere on February 17th, which is a Saturday night at the Emagine in Royal Oak. And Doug Bradley's going to be there. So that's kind of exciting. And then a week later, on the 23rd, it releases nationwide. And they'll be doing midnight shows on the night of the 22nd. And it'll get what's called a slow rollout, like 50, 100 screens. And if it does well, fingers crossed, we get some good support. Just like the Terrifier film, it will expand, So that's what our hope is.
Now, in a movie like this and in a situation like you're in, what will make this a success?
Really, it's grassroots. So like you actually offering me to come on is just, amazing. So thank you. In Riff, I've been a huge Riff fan. I've been listening since you guys, would play Jay Giles, right? Yeah, it really does. It comes down to, those listening or watching really can have a hand in helping the movie go somewhere and do something, because it really is sort of a word of mouth. Starts in Michigan and it kind of goes from there,
Mhm. Yeah. And how is streaming affected what you do? Is it better or worse for guys in your business?
Oh boy. Hmm. Yeah, streaming, I'm sure you hear it from the artists, right? The musical acts and so forth. And we used to, our bread and butter used to come from disc, Blu-ray and DVD. And before that, it was obviously VHS. But it's hard to collect And so we're now entering days where you can have a movie released on a streaming platform on, let's say, a Tuesday on Tubi and these other platforms, and by Thursday they've knocked it off the peripheral, and you got to go searching for it, so it kind of vanishes.
Hmm.
So what we're actually doing is we went directly to the theaters, and I've actually started a company called Dark Planet Releasing, and we're taking movies into the theaters ourselves, just because it's we're going to reduce the middleman. And it might sound funny as a comparison, but Taylor Swift just did that with her movie she put in theaters,
Hmm.
and the formula was quite successful for her. So I'm not a Taylor Swift music fan, but I applaud that move.
Yeah, you got to write some more movies that attracts teenage girls. But so me personally, I'm a movie like theater guy. Like I try to go once a week or so.
Nice.
Bet you I saw between 30 and 40 movies in the theater last year. Uh,
Nice.
I try to get to see all the horror movies.
Yeah.
And I thought the great horror movies from last year was I thought The Nun 2 was pretty well. We just mentioned Evil Dead. I thought that was fantastic.
Yep.
There were some really good ones out there. And I have to admit that I thought the best movie that I saw all of last year, and I saw it like on December 28th, was the new Godzilla movie. And I am not a Godzilla fan, but I just went and saw it, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And I thought it was outstanding, predictable, but I thought it was really good.
Yeah, well, it's from I haven't seen it, but I've heard from all my film friends that are seeing it. They say it's very character driven, and you care more. It's not just Godzilla, knocking down buildings and so forth. But that's it's definitely on my list for sure, and it's up for an Academy Award too. So that's pretty amazing.
It was kind of typical and, like I said, predictable, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I guess at the end of the day, when you go to a movie theater, that's what you want to do. You just want to enjoy yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's not, a Thorns isn't high art. It's a lower budgeted, horror film. And, we just want people to enjoy it and have a good time.
Yeah, so far this year, I've already seen Founders Day. I saw that this week, which was meh. And then I
Yeah.
saw Night Swim, which I thought was better than people were saying it was going to be.
Yeah, Night Swim hasn't gotten, that's a Blumhouse. And, they haven't been, their last two, right? They did The Exorcist,
Mhm. Yeah,
sequel, which, that's a tough one to even go after, right? When I heard they were doing a sequel, I'm like, what are they doing? But yeah,
so
no,
no, I was going to say, you mentioned the 80s movies. I was just at a bar the other night, and there was this girl in there. She's probably in her late 20s or whatever, and she had all these tattoos, and they were, horror related, pumpkins and crap like that. And I said,
Pinhead.
"So are you a horror movie fan?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "Well, what is your favorite?" She goes, "Nightmare, on Elm Street." And I'm thinking she wasn't even alive when those movies came out. So you mentioned 80s movies before. You mentioned a couple of them. What are some of your
Yep.
other favorites?
Well, I mean, outside the genre, I think my favorite filmmaker is Kubrick. 2001, Clockwork Orange, those movies. But from a horror standpoint, Carpenter is sort of the benchmark, with The Thing and In the Fog. I love, and even Prince of Darkness has grown on me. There's a European director by the name of Dario Argento who did a movie called Suspiria. And if you haven't seen that, I think you'd really love it. It's got, this surreal cinematography, and the soundtrack was done by a group called Goblin.
Mm.
And they did the soundtrack for Dawn of the Dead, Romero's, and but put that on your list if you haven't seen that. I think you'd really dig it. But Romero, George Romero's, a big fan. Yeah, I'm a fan of his work too.
What do you think of since you're a rock fan? What do you think of Rob Zombie's movies?
Oh yeah, well, you know, uh, uh, you know, um, I applaud. He did one of the Halloween sequels I thought was really admirable. I think his sequel to the first Halloween
Mhm.
film that he did, and he stages really wonderful action scenes. in suspense scenes. And, so from that standpoint, I think he's strong, and, he's getting better as a director, I think. Lords of Salem, and then a few of those are pretty brutal, right? The Three from Hell and Devil's Rejects, and in those. I worked with Sid Haig, who's in a few of his movies, and unfortunately Sid passed.
Yeah,
But
Sid was in Sid's in all those Devil's Rejects, House of a Thousand Corpses. Those first two movies came out and I thought they were fantastic. Lords
yeah.
of Salem I watched twice and I don't get it. I don't think it's very good.
Well,
But
there you again, yeah. And do you remember that one? It was called 31.
31, yeah, 31.
And that was kind of brutal, but it's like, so
It was kind of like a Running Man thing.
yeah, exactly. So, and then he did the Munsters, right, for Netflix, and that was interesting.
I
So,
watched it. I mean, I can appreciate it. It really wasn't my cup of tea, but it was what it is. I really like how Rob uses like classic rock a certain way. The last scene from Devil's Rejects where they're getting shot at and Freebird's playing. My brother said to me one time, "You'll never hear Freebird the same way," and
yeah,
he's right.
yeah,
That happened.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, when cinema uses classic songs, they can leave an indelible mark, and sometimes it's not. It's like in Clockwork Orange. I can't hear Singing in the Rain anymore.
That's true. Yeah, that's
Without
true.
yeah.
Now
So.
in Thorns in the trailer that you sent me, of course, there's the chorus of young girls. It sounds like singing. Do you guys use any other music throughout the movie?
Well, what's interesting is I'm actually the score is something that I did for the film, and it's the first indie film where I did the score. I don't consider myself, and I don't want to turn this into there are skilled musicians out there, but I'm sort of coming from the carpenter school, and I wanted a specific synth-driven, sort of 80s sound, and there are a lot of sampled sounds you can take these days, and so forth. So, but we didn't acquire any outside music by any existing artists at all. So it's all just a real simple, but we're getting real good feedback. The music score people like, so which is good.
Yeah, right off the top of my head, you start talking about that. I think of Stranger Things. That movie takes place, and we're about the same age, but it's like you could see yourself back in 1984 just by watching that show.
Yeah, I think that I'd be lying if I said Stranger Things wasn't a bit of an impetus or a motivator for Thorns. The idea of the '80s retro, and I just love everything about that series. It's just a lot of fun. You know.
Yeah. So when did you talked about the process? So when did you first put pen to paper to start this movie?
Well, I mean, it was 2 years ago.
Okay.
If you go back 2 years, there's, just almost like a musician might, who's writing a song, you're sitting around going, what am I going to do next? And um, I said to myself, I've always wanted to do a makeup effects driven horror film. And I kept thinking about all these 80s horror films, and I'm looking at Stranger Things and some other films, and that just sort of started me down this path. And I had some ideas for a setting, and so I crank out a treatment, which is like a 5-10 page short story, and then you begin to expand it, and turn it into a screenplay eventually, and then you're tasked with getting the resource for it, right? Which is never easy.
Yeah.
So.
Now, when you're writing this movie, do you know how it ends, and you're just trying to figure out a way to get there?
Most of the time you do. I think most filmmakers kind of do. I don't think I've ever started a story where it's been like, ooh, what's going to happen next? So when you write, you are supposed to, even in your treatment form, you should have a beginning, middle, and end.
Mm.
And then you just begin to expand each of those. You expand your beginning, then your middle, then your end, and try and keep it original and try not to bore people along the way, right?
Yeah, because I was watching Founders Day the other day, and I think that they ended it like 6 times. It's like, just stop it. Just put this movie to bed.
Yeah,
But
what is that? Yeah, there's the false ending, on
uh,
steroids or
yeah,
something, right?
it was not great. But it's like I interview rock bands a lot of times, a lot actually, and
Yeah.
sometimes they'll just talk about how like a certain song or something just starts speaking to them, and they just kind of go with it. Do you ever find that when you're writing a movie?
Yeah, 100%. It's always, I mean, you would ask the question before how it all started, and I was very general, but it's usually something somewhere that won't let go, that sort of attaches itself to you, and it might be just, for me, it started with the monster and then the imagery, and I don't want to give away our what the thorns are and in the thing behind that, but uh, we just built on that, and that's kind of where the story came from. So I completely get that whole logic with how songs could be written, right?
Mhm. And how many people that went to your the Motion Picture Institute helped you with this? Did any of them?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, when I do my all of our students do their own things. When you come to the program, it's a 1 year program and you make your own movies. Every semester, you make a different movie and each one's slightly more ambitious. Then when you graduate, we help you get that movie into festivals and then of course we try and get you, into the freelance arena, to work on movie sets. And in these days, some of our grads relocate down to Georgia, where there's a big film tax incentive.
Mhm.
We used to have one, and hopefully
Yeah,
it will return.
right.
But and I'll do my weekend movies. I'll do a movie every couple of years, and when I do, I'll draw in some of the more talented and available grads, and our the art direction for this film was sort of spearheaded by a professional, but we brought a grad in and he sort of took over. And and so they work on these films as well, for sure.
So Thorns going to be dropping in theaters coming up on the 17th, like you said, in February at Royal Oak, and then on the 23rd
Yeah.
throughout some more Michigan locations. I'll have to try. I always like to go up to Imagine on Tuesdays. I got the $5 movie nights, so we always go there for those.
Well, we'll put you on the guest list if you're available any of the nights. Come on out. We'd love to have you out there. So
For sure. Hey, switching
yeah.
gears real fast. I got my Haunted Michigan podcast. Have you ever had a paranormal experience?
Yeah, yeah. We were making a movie, and we were out in kind of by Bay City, and we were in an old farmhouse, and we kept hearing a noise that sounded like a faint scream. And our audio guy, you know how the audio guys have more sensitive, directionalized audio on set. So we would start rolling and the audio guy would go, no, wait, I'm hearing something. And we're like, well, we're not. And so I had to put his headphones on and you could hear it faintly, and we could not locate it, but it sounded a bit like a scream. And it was somewhere in this farmhouse, and it was just the creepiest thing I'd ever experienced. And I would have to say, if that wasn't a haunted ghost experience, then I never had one,
Did it finally stop, or did you guys just shoot it?
Yeah, well, we were there for two other nights and we heard it one other time, and then one night we were all geared up trying to, and then it wasn't there, so obviously you must know that stuff can't always be predictable, right?
Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah, you should call my friend Steve Shippey up there. He's in that area. I don't know if you know Steve, but he does a lot of the Travel Channel ghost stuff and that. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff up there. There's that Michigan Hell House, which is up in the middle of the state somewhere. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, isn't it amazing how popular paranormal, has become, and just ghost hunting in general? I think it's just amazing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll tell you what, Doug, thanks so much for the time. Good luck with Thorns. I'm sure I'll bump into you somewhere. Oh, by the way,
Yeah,
one last thing I forgot to ask you about. I wrote down here.
yeah.
My friend Kurt said that you have some stories with Ron Ashton and the Stooges.
Oh yeah.
Did you know
Yeah,
Ron?
Ron.
Yeah?
Yeah, Yeah, Ron was in one of our freshman film. We were fresh out of college, and I was in my early 20s, and Ron, through a connection, was no longer obviously with the Stooges, and he was looking to switch gears, and he wanted to get into movies, and so we cast him in this movie called Hellmaster, and it was him, John Saxon, and then we had Dave Emge from Dawn of the Dead. And they were all together, and we would just have these. I mean, we shot in, I don't know if you remember, Clinton Valley Mental Asylum in Pontiac, Michigan. It was this 100-year-old asylum, and it was active, and we accessed it, and we were making a movie there. And so Ron was running around there, and there were a lot of parties with Ron, and he was a crazy guy. And he had me over to his house one night, and he handed me a loaded gun, but I didn't know it was loaded, and it misfired and put a hole in his carpet. And I was never invited back to his home after that.
Well, I guess we'll end on a good rock and roll story.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Doug, thanks so much for your time. Good luck with everything.
Thank you, Meltdown.